folks, welcome. Thank you very much for joining the Joint Masonic Education that Mike Jarzabek has so kindly worked with me and with Ryan and Brian to put together. And my continued thanks and appreciation to those three for all that they do, because it's a very considerable lift. I want to get started with a few announcements. Make it easy on me and for you guys. Tonight, we're going to, we're blessed with Brother Chuck Dunning presenting Shekinah, the Blazing Star, and the Intendents of the Building, Reflections on the 8th Degree of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite. That's the Southern Masonic jurisdiction. Tonight afterwards, about 9:30 Eastern or so, maybe a little bit later, right at Teresita Arechiga, I'm going to go with that, is presenting Women of Freemasonry. That's a register-only talk that is going on the left coast, the Pacific coast. Tomorrow, of course, Masonic Roundtable. Of course, it's Thursday night, right? Then Friday, happy hour is still a go. That's the Masonic happy hour. I'll get on sometime around 5:30, 5:45 Eastern time. It's drop in, drop out at your leisure for several hours. Then the Unknown Philosophers are presenting guest philosopher Johnny Royal at 9 Eastern, 8 Central. You'll need to register for that. Saturday, July 11th, that's just this Saturday, the Academy of Reflection is holding its summer social, followed by an open house. And that's an open house discussion to all Masons. Now, the Academy summer social is restricted to members and associates. But the open house discussion afterwards at 7 Eastern or 6 Central is a really cool way to talk to the Academy members, think about, or get connected in, see if that's something you might be interested in. This is a pretty cool deal. Send me a link, send me a query directly, and I will get you the, just direct message me. We're requesting to join, and I'll get you the link into that open house on Saturday evening. Sunday, July 12th. Brother Jake, what you got going on Sunday?
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Once again, the Valley of St. Louis is bringing back its virtual education series. For the last couple months, we've been exploring individual degrees in the Scottish Rite. When we started our series, we started kind of midstream. We started about the 7th degree. So we need to go back, and we're going to explore some of those earlier degrees as we keep moving forward in the Rose-Croix work. So this Sunday at 7 o'clock, we're going to have a discussion about the 4th degree, Secret Master. We'll look at its ritual evolution, how it started out in the Franken manuscript and then shifted over time through Pike's efforts and into the current work. And then we'll take some time to look at the lessons, symbols, and explore the normal things we kind of follow with that. Any of the brothers who are interested, the event page is up on Refracted Light. I think it's been shared there a couple times. Or they can reach out to me personally, and I'll pop my email in the chat later. But that'll be this Sunday, 7 o'clock Central. Thank you.
Very cool. Very cool. Looking forward to that. Sunday night's been our traditional Master Craftsman class time, so it's kind of neat to take a break and kind of do a heads up and revisit all at once. I have a really cool announcement. On July 22nd, we're bringing back the mental health, Masonic mental health panel. I know I've just screwed that up. Masons Helping Masons on the mental health side of the house. This is part 2 of the panel. This is a continued discussion. And Brother Chuck, do you want to talk about some of the goings on there?
Yeah, sure. This panel will be composed of brothers who are licensed mental health professionals of one sort or another. And whereas in the first one, we were just covering the general issues that people ought to be aware of during COVID-19, the next panel discussion is going to be focused on self-care methods. So we'll be offering specific things that you can do to make sure that you are practicing good self-care.
Awesome. Now that is going to actually start 30 minutes later than our normal Wednesday night panel, or just Wednesday night Joint Masonic Education. And that being the case, it'll be 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central, not so that we can include the folks on the Pacific time zone at 5:30. So we'll get some announcements out there. I'll get that up on the event page. Joe, much appreciated. And Brother Joe, we've got a certain Mid-Atlantic Esotericon coming up. You want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, sir. So for those who know, the Mid-Atlantic Esotericon will be held virtually on July 25th. And you're going to see such lovely faces as Brother Chuck Dunning, who's sitting right there, and a whole host of other folks. Tickets for the virtual event are still available until the 15th. We have a lot of people coming in. We're going to do Zoom webinar format for that. So it'll be a lot cleaner, and you won't have 300 microphones all going at the same time. And we've got tarot readings by Angel Millar, Brother Jamie Lamb. The sign-ups are going to come out Friday for those. And it's $15, 6 presentations, a whole bunch of stuff in between, breakout rooms, just to keep the spirit alive. And so like I said, just go to our Facebook page or midatlanticesotericon.com. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Cool. All right. July started off to be a pretty empty month. And then within about a week and a half period, this is all, now Mid-Atlantic Esotericon, of course, was already out there, but within about a week and a half, 2 weeks or so, this has all kind of come together. It's very exciting. It's very exciting to see this. Many of the lodges are dark. Even if they came back from COVID, many lodges are still dark because of the restrictions on meetings and such. So it is very cool that we are really focused in continuing this Masonic education. I'm always happy to see this. Without further ado, though, I would like to introduce Brother Chuck Dunning as our speaker this evening. He has kindly agreed to give us a talk, and I think this is an amazing degree that we really don't put enough focus into, that I'm excited to hear his concepts and revelations on. Brother Chuck?
Thank you, Brother Randy, and I appreciate everybody being here tonight. So I'm going to be talking, of course, as you know now, about the 8th degree. I'm not going to be doing a broad overview of the degree. I'm really going to be focusing in on some specific stuff, and particularly some concepts that the degree is trying to communicate to us. And I'm going to talk for half hour, give or take, and have some slides along the way. And then I hope that we'll have some discussion afterwards. Before we get into all of that, I should say that I'm presenting my own reflections. And although I will reference a number of Masonic and esoteric sources, these really are my thoughts. In keeping with my obligations, I will only speak of things that are already found in publicly available versions of this degree. And as always is the case, nobody in Masonry speaks for the fraternity as a whole. So I welcome you to think deeply and critically about what I share with you, and to form your own questions, insights, and understandings, no matter how different they might be from mine or anybody else's. I also need to say that there are many important elements of this degree that I won't be addressing in this presentation, such as why there are 5 intendants chosen to replace the fallen Master Hiram, or the significances of their different specialties, or meanings of the triple triangle. Those and other mysteries of the 8th degree are left for your own consideration, and I'm sure if you ever get to hear Jake Thompson speak on the 8th degree, he'll probably elucidate a lot of that for you. So let's get started. I'm going to try to share a screen here with you. There we go. All right. So you're going to see some text. I don't often put a lot of text on the screen. I know that that's kind of a faux pas for presenting, but sometimes I think it's important to be able to read and hear the words at the same time. So here we are. The degrees of this rite are not for those who are content with the mere ceremonies and uninterested in the mines of wisdom buried beneath the surface. How far you will advance in your understanding of Freemasonry depends upon you alone. Here, as everywhere in the world, darkness struggles with light. Clouds and shadows intervene between you and the truth. When you become imbued with the morality of Masonry, and it is familiar to you, then be prepared to receive more lofty philosophical instruction. Those are from the instructions of the current ritual, and they're in the ritual monitor and guide that Art de Hoyos has produced, that wonderful text. In an older version of the ritual, it is added, here as in all the degrees, you meet with the emblems and the names of deity, the true knowledge of whose character and attributes it has ever been a chief object of Masonry to perpetuate. To appreciate his infinite greatness and goodness, to rely implicitly upon his providence, to revere and venerate him as the supreme architect, creator, and legislator of the universe is the first of Masonic duties. And if you think about that first question that is asked of the EA whenever he is admitted into the lodge, before the degree can actually proceed, you can see that first is definitely worth highlighting there. But that true knowledge of the nature of deity is something that this degree is calling our attention to and saying that that is an important part of the Masonic experience. And then in Morals and Dogma, at the close of the chapter on this degree is written, the symbols and ceremonies of Masonry have more than one meaning. They rather conceal than disclose the truth. They hint it only, at least, and their varied meanings are only to be discovered by reflection and study. Truth is not only symbolized by light, but as the ray of light is separable into rays of different colors, so is truth separable into kinds. It is the province of Masonry to teach all truths, not moral truth alone, but political and philosophical and even religious truth, so far as concerns the great and essential principles of each. I think that's a pretty important statement. So often we hear that we're not supposed to talk about religion and politics in Masonry, but this statement is making it clear that there is a place for that. The challenge is how we have that conversation. So we have a clear declaration here that there are many ways to appropriately interpret the things we experience in Masonry. And in doing so, one of the primary aims for us is to more fully know God. So now I invite you to join me in considering how this degree is relevant to that aim. In order to do so, we're going to be referencing one of our minds of wisdom, Kabbalah, which is introduced in the fourth degree of the current Southern jurisdiction ritual, where it is explained as an important aid for gaining deeper insight and understanding of our rite. Before I go any further here, I just want to say I'm not a native Hebrew speaker. I've been involved with esoteric studies for a very long time now, and I've heard all kinds of different pronunciations. I've had native speakers of Hebrew try to help me out, and so just bear with me if I'm not pronouncing something the way you think I should, and maybe you can give me some instruction and wise counsel later. In case you need a little refresher, Kabbalah is the esoteric tradition of Judaism, and one of its central symbolic systems is the tree of life, a diagram of 10 basic divine powers or principles of creation called Sephirot, and also illustrating their relationships with each other through the paths on the tree, which are associated with the Hebrew letters. Much of the actual work in traditional Jewish Kabbalah is concerned with gaining deeper insight and understanding of Scripture. Kabbalists hold that it is possible to have more than one meaningful and valid interpretation of things, and that these can be very different from each other without necessarily negating each other. So let's start our work of seeking a deeper interpretation of the eighth degree by going back to the beginning, and I mean the very beginning, as it is told in the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. In the Hebrew words of this scripture, the Spirit of God is Ruach Elohim. And Ruach is a Hebrew word that not only means spirit, but also breath. It is immediately after this spirit or breath moves that God gives birth to the light. Note the order here: the breath, and then the light, breathing, and then illumination. This order is followed later when God creates Adam by first forming his body from the soil, which is called Adamah in Hebrew, and then breathing the breath of life, the Nishmat Chaim, into his nostrils. At that moment of receiving God's exhalation as his inspiration, Adam becomes a living being, and not only alive, but made in the image of God, illuminated with intelligence, with the ability to speak, and thus capable of naming things. On that note, let's give special attention to the Hebrew name of God used in these particular scriptures, which is Elohim. The I am suffix means it is a plural noun. Furthermore, the actual Hebrew words of that text have God saying, "Let us make humans in our image." Here we have God unequivocally insisted upon as the one and only supreme being by Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, nonetheless referring to God's self in the plural. This is a mystery that ought to grab our attention, for it suggests that either our very scriptures contradict most of the theologies based upon them, or that there is a deeper understanding of both to be grasped. With this mystery in mind, we can look at the eighth degree and note that on one side of the jewel is the divine name Achad, and that's on the right side of the screen there. As a noun, Achad means one, and our ritual tells us that as a divine name, it refers to the one God who is the source of all. However, the word Achad can also refer to a number of things that are united together as one. So it is that Achad, as a name for God, not only reminds us of God as the transcendent one who creates all things, but is also the immanent one in which all things are united together. The name Achad is a reminder that nothing exists entirely separate from God, that God is present in all things, and thus that all things are actually united in the dimension of spirit. Achad is the one who is also many, just like Elohim. Now let's turn our attention to the other side of the jewel, the one on the left, where we find the term Ben Churim. Ben Churim is traditionally translated from Hebrew as son of nobles, where Ben literally means son, but may also mean a descendant or disciple, and Chur means noble. Chur is also directly related to the verb chara, meaning to burn or to glow. Thus, on the whole, the Chur in Ben Churim conveys the more general sense of brightness and illumination. Once again, note that the I am suffix signifies the plural. So to whom does this term actually refer? Who are these noble, bright, glowing ones, and who are their descendants or disciples? These are mysteries not directly answered in the lessons of this degree, so we should consider some different possibilities in response to this mysterious term. First, some Masonic scholars have speculated that the name Hiram was based on the word Chur. So it is possible that Ben Churim is simply intended to mean one who is the follower of those who are like Hiram, or more to the point, a Freemason. To get to another possibility, let's refer to one of the other key symbols of this degree. On the flap of the apron is a triangle bearing the ciphered initials of not only A for Achad and B for Ben Churim, but also SH for Shekinah. Shekinah is a feminine Hebrew word literally meaning a dwelling place, and it is used as a name for the presence of God in this world. According to Kabbalah, Shekinah can be understood as the feminine personification of the Spirit of God, the Ruach Elohim, mentioned at the beginning of Genesis, as well as the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, and the divine wisdom, Chokhmah in Hebrew or Sophia in Greek, who is clearly addressed as her in the book of Proverbs. Here is how she speaks of herself in that book. The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way. Before his works of old, I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, or ever the earth was. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass upon the face of the depth. And you can hear the connection with Genesis there. Shekinah is also the pillar of smoke and flame that led the Israelites through the wilderness and appeared in the tabernacle and later in the temple above the mercy seat on the Ark of the Covenant. She is therefore called the Shekinah glory and the glory of God. Keeping in mind that Freemasons dedicate our labors to the glory of God, it should be no surprise that Shekinah has long been of interest to us. In Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, the entry on Shekinah reads, "The Shekinah was the symbol of the divine glory, but the true glory of divinity is truth, and divine truth is therefore the Shekinah of Freemasonry. This is symbolized by light, which is no longer used by us as a substitute for the Shekinah, or the divine glory, but as its symbol, the physical expression of its essence." Many years prior to Mackey's statement, Shekinah was already associated with the blazing star. Mackey wrote that in 1878. Well, that's when the encyclopedia was published. But Shekinah was, as I said, many years prior to that, already associated with the blazing star of the Blue Lodge, as noted in the publication of John Brown's Master Key Through the 3 Degrees, which was published in the late 1790s. Then in 1846, the Reverend Brother George Oliver also makes this connection in an apology for the Freemasons, where he reviews the story of Genesis and says, "The Shekinah or blazing star from heaven was placed as a guard to protect the tree of life. From this Shekinah proceeded that celebrated Kabbalistical symbol of the deity called the Sephirot, consisting of 10 splendors, 3 of which are placed as the united light of God or crown of glory." In the same paragraph, after citing the Kabbalistic text Sefer Yetzirah, Oliver goes on to report this. "In one of the ineffable degrees of Masonry called Master in Israel, the blazing star is made to consist of 5 points, like a royal crown, in the center of which appears the initial of the sacred name." We should note that Master in Israel is another name for the intendant of the building degree. And the Franken manuscript of 1783 confirms Oliver's description of these symbols. Now, as a brief aside, since Oliver has mentioned the Kabbalah so clearly, and especially because the Tree of Life is so important to the Scottish Rite, we should take a moment to note some interesting parallels between the apron of this degree and the Tree of Life. So I will just point these out. As you look at the screen there, you'll notice in the flap of the apron is that triangle. And see how it parallels the upper triangle on the Tree of Life. And then as you move down on the apron, you see the 2 arms and scales of the balance scales there, the single beam scale. And you'll notice that they correspond with the 2 pillars and also allude to the middle pillar upon which those balance beams would rest. And then we've got this 9-pointed star that we use now in the ritual. And it's interesting that that parallels the Sephirah Yesod, which is the purple one down there, the next to the bottom one. And that one is considered the 9th if you start counting from the top, the first one being number 1 and counting all the way down, you get 9. So there's a real interesting parallel there. Whether that's intentional or not, I can't say. I find it meaningful whether it was intentional or not. Now, back to the blazing star. In 1850, Oliver published a book entitled Symbol of Glory, Showing the Object and End of Freemasonry, in which he quoted the lecture from a version of the fourth degree, Secret Master, which said, "I have seen a blazing star," or the Shekinah. Several paragraphs later, in his own words, Oliver says, "The primitive blazing star of Masonry had 5 points." Again, we hear him emphasizing that. Further on in the chapter, he offers this: "The continental definition is, the blazing star represents the sacred name of God as a universal spirit who enlivens our hearts, purifies our reason, increases our knowledge, and makes us better men." We should also note that, consistent with what Oliver reports, older versions of the 8th degree apron bear a 5-pointed star instead of the 9-pointed star in current use. Within that 5-pointed star are 3 Hebrew yuds, each the initial of one of the 3 sacred names spoken along with the name Shekinah at an important moment in this degree. Furthermore, the McClanahan script for the 8th degree specifies that over the master should hang a blazing star with 5 points, and in its center 3 yuds, all surrounded by an interlaced triple triangle. And then in the lecture of that version, the master also says, "You will still advance towards the light, towards that star, toward the star blazing in the distance, which is an emblem of the divine truth given by God to the first men and preserved amid all the vicissitudes of ages and the traditions and teachings of Masonry." Although we now use only the 9-pointed star in connection with the triple triangle of lights in this degree, the language of the ritual still refers to it as a blazing star and an emblem of divine truth, and still has the divine name within it. Thus, we have the blazing star present in the 8th degree in a way that clearly denotes it as an emblem of Shekinah. According to some Kabbalists, Shekinah is not only revered as the pillar of smoke and flame, the divine wisdom, and the Holy Spirit, she is also the breath of life, the Nishmat Chaim, that God breathed into Adam. This is a very important point because the story of Genesis tells us that we are all descendants of Adam. And so the breath of life is inherited by all human beings. Therefore, among her other manifestations, Shekinah may be regarded as the breath and light of life within each of us, regardless of race, religion, politics, or any other factor that distinguishes one human being from another, even our sins. She is thus not only our spiritual connection with God, but also with each other. We are all joined by the one divine spirit of life in and around all of us. The book of Genesis makes it clear that Adam failed to understand and realize his unity with God. Adam's ignorance of the Shekinah as the light of truth and the breath of life within him meant that he could not appreciate the bliss of Eden. And so he and all of his descendants were fated to suffer in our sense of separation from God. Kabbalah also helps us understand this more deeply by suggesting that Adam is often best understood as the whole of humanity, rather than taken literally as an historical person. In this sense, Adam represents the totality of all who ever lived or ever will live. Yet, in either case, a Kabbalistic reading of Genesis suggests that Shekinah nonetheless dwells in each of us, whether we know it or not. We would not be alive without our earthly matter, Adama, being wedded with her. But most of us are like Adam in that we do not consciously realize her presence within. And we are therefore relatively unresponsive to her, which is to say, we're figuratively dead to her. She is thus the great widow, ever seeking to raise her children, the widow's sons in our case, one person at a time, to awareness of our birthright, our union with God, and our union with each other through her. So it is that we may now understand the term Ben Churim more deeply and mystically. The bright glow alluded to by the root word chur is a reminder of Shekinah, the blazing star, the glory of God. The plurality indicated by the suffix im gives churim the mean of all beings illuminated by her. For Masons to acknowledge one another as Ben Churim is therefore not unlike the traditional Hindu greeting Namaste, which means I bow to the divine in you. It is an acknowledgement that you and I, all of us, are of the Achad, the one who is the source of all, the giver of the breath of life and the light of truth present in this world and within us as Shekinah. At this point, it's pertinent to return back to the fourth degree, where the master tells the candidate, like the light you bear, which yet you cannot see, truth and the lost word, which are light, are within reach of every man that lives. Would he but open his eyes and see? The broad highway of duty, straight as an arrow, leads directly to them. In that statement about the light you bear, you may now recognize another allusion within the fourth degree to the very same mystery we are examining in this degree. The lesson of that degree emphasizes duty as the means to more fully awaken to the light we already bear, which we now take to mean Shekinah. The etymology of the word duty traces back to the Latin debere and debitum, which mean debt. In short, a duty is a moral obligation to actually do something in return for something we have received. Furthermore, because duty as we speak of it here is a moral obligation, it cannot be something imposed upon us like a tax or some form of servitude. It must instead freely well up from the depths of the heart. In this degree, we are reminded that we have each received the divine breath and that through Shekinah, we are each one with God as well as all of humanity. So if we feel a sense of obligation and gratitude for the divine breath of Shekinah, how are we to perform a fitting duty that puts our knowledge to practical use? To begin making our way toward an answer, recall that when God created Adam, the stated purpose was not only to have him rule over the earth and its creatures. More especially, humanity was meant to tend and care for the Garden of Eden in which God had placed the tree of life. In Kabbalah, Eden is understood as a metaphor for living in blissful awareness of the presence of God, not a place, but a state of consciousness. It is in and through that state of consciousness that Adam was meant to rule, but Adam and Eve's initial innocence is the innocence of all human beings when we are young children. It is blissful ignorance. Their temptation by the serpent, eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, shame about their nakedness, and ejection from Eden represents the natural development of human beings. They even lie to their father God, just like we do when we're teenagers and pubescent. When we are first born, our consciousness is pure, simple, innocent, but also ignorant and foolish. Yet even in infancy, like Adam and Eve, we start becoming aware of the complexity of existence, beginning with our desires and our differences from each other, our vulnerabilities, and the suffering we cannot escape because of them. This awareness continues to grow, especially in the turbulence and anxiety of puberty and adolescence, so that by the time we are mature adults, most of us consider ourselves completely separate individuals and feel some degree of aloneness in what seems to be an excruciatingly complicated dog-eat-dog world. Genesis portrays the terrible depths of this suffering in the story of Adam's sons, Cain and Abel, in which Cain's competitiveness, envy, and jealousy lead him to murder his own brother. When God asks Cain where Abel is, Cain replies, "Am I my brother's keeper?" So it is that Cain represents all of us who have forgotten we are spiritually one with everyone else, whether we like them or not. Cain's actions, like those of the ruffians who slew Hiram, show us the worst consequences of that ignorance. The price Cain must pay is to travel even further from Eden, even deeper into the complex illusions of separation from God and division from other human beings. The stories of Genesis can make it seem as if there is no way back to the peace and harmony of the Garden of Eden and the Tree of Life. Some people have even used it to teach that earthly existence is a prison we must endure until we leave this body after death. But we should recall that the underlying reason we suffer in this way is because we have forgotten who and what each of us actually is, a Ben Kurim. Our duty, in gratitude for the life and light we have received, is therefore to think and act in ways that reflect our spiritual unity, our mystic tie, and thereby increasingly allow Shekinah to shine through us and dispel the darkness that is the illusion of separation from God and our fellow creatures. Now, what about the title we each receive through initiation in the 8th degree, Intendant of the building? What is that building, and how are we to tend it? A Kabbalistic interpretation of Genesis holds that all of creation was and still is sanctified by God. Recall that God clearly declares each act of creation and thus everything in the natural world is good. We haven't spoiled that basic fact. Our fall from Eden didn't break creation. The whole cosmos is still one great temple erected and inhabited by the great architect of the universe. In terms of both an edifice and an ongoing construction project, it is the grandest building that we intendants of the building are charged to tend. So if that's the building, then in light of all we have seen, what does it mean to tend it? To answer that question, we'll contemplate words from the lectures in the McClanahan and Magnum Opus versions of the ritual and commentaries and morals and dogma, some of which are still referenced in the current Southern jurisdiction text, A Bridge to Light. For the next few minutes, I invite you to close your eyes and open your heart and mind to these words. I'm going to challenge you to go ahead and close your eyes and open your heart and your mind. Masonry does not occupy itself with crying down this world, nor exhort us to detach our hearts from this earthly life as empty, fleeting, and unworthy, and fix them upon heaven as the only sphere deserving the love of the loving or the meditation of the wise. It teaches that man has high duties to perform and a high destiny to fulfill on this earth. It is here his influences are to operate. It is his house and not a tent, his home and not merely a school. He is sent into this world not to be constantly hankering after, dreaming of, preparing for another, but to do his duty and fulfill his destiny on this earth, to do all that lies in his power to improve it, to render it a scene of elevated happiness to himself, to those around him, to those who are to come after him. His life here is part of his immortality, and this world also is among the stars. The law of our being is love of life and its interests and adornments, not a low or sensual love, not love of wealth, of fame, of ease, of power, of splendor, not low worldliness, but the love of earth as the garden on which the Creator has lavished such miracles of beauty. Those only who feel a deep interest in and affection for this world will work resolutely for its amelioration. Those who undervalue this life naturally become querulous and discontented and lose their interest in the welfare of their fellows. To serve them, and so to do our duty as Masons, we must feel that the object is worth the exertion and be content with this world in which God has placed us until he permits us to remove to a better one. He is here with us and does not deem this an unworthy world. The brightness of the soul shines through this visible and sometimes darkened life, through all its surrounding cares and labors. The humblest life may feel its connection with its infinite source. There will always be in this world wrongs to forgive, suffering to alleviate, sorrow asking for sympathy, necessities and destitution to relieve, and ample occasion for the exercise of active charity and beneficence. And he who sits unconcerned amidst it all, perhaps enjoying his own comforts and luxuries the more, by contrasting them with the hungry and ragged destitution and shivering misery of his fellows, he is not contented, but selfish and unfeeling. He is the faithless steward that embezzles what God has given him in trust for the impoverished and suffering among his brethren. The true Mason must be and must have a right to be content with himself, and he can be so only when he lives not for himself alone, but for others also, who need his assistance and have a claim upon his sympathy. Charity is the great channel, it has well been said, through which God passes all his mercy upon mankind. God himself is love, and every degree of charity that dwells in us is the participation of the divine nature. If your eyes have been closed, you're welcome to open them again. So in summary, to begin serving as an intendant of the building is to remember that we, each and all of us, are Ben Kurim, the bright, shining children of Shekinah, the divine light and holy breath of Echad, which is the source and the unity of everything that is. Then, in mindfulness of our oneness with God and each other, we welcome charity, which is divine love, to be our guide and our aim in living with each other and tending to God's creation, this magnificent ongoing project of building the Temple of Temples. Now, with that, I'm ready to wrap up my lecture, and I invite your questions, comments, and open discussion. But I want to just briefly flash this up on the screen that you can see some suggested reading here. And I'll show that later on sometime during discussion, but I'm going to close down the screen for now. And all right, let's see. I saw Scott waving his hand.
Yes, Chuck. While I was sitting there with my eyes closed, listening to that, I realized that I was not really an attendant of the building until this year, while I'm senior warden. And it's just opening up all the things that I've been doing over the last year and a half. We give awards for first responders at our lodge because of me. Or next year, some of our charities of the quarter that we are going to have as permanent ones are one suggestion by our local fire department, and another quarter it will be one suggested by our police department. Because and primarily for at-risk youth, but as they see fit. And that feeling just went over really well with everyone I've discussed it with. And we've had more maintenance, repair, replace, upgrades at my lodge since June 11th than in the previous 7 years combined. And I was tearing up while you were discussing that, because it's like, wow, I finally deserve to wear that apron.
That's wonderful, brother. Thank you for sharing that. All right.
Brother Chuck, there's a note on the live Facebook feed from Brother Rene Perez.
Oh, yeah.
So, brother, it says, "Hey, Chuck Dunning, love this presentation. Great seeing you again. On the ninth Sephiroth, Yesod, there is
Yes.
an interesting thing to think about. The father of Masonry apparently is Lamech. In the patriarchs, he is the ninth generation from Adam. In Greek gematria, his name is a value of 676, which is the square of 26. Whoops. Okay, there we go. Square of 26, tetragrammaton. In the old ways of spelling masonry, masonry, has a value of 676. Apologies for the numbers."
You can always count on that, brother, for some interesting esoteric connections, no doubt. Yeah, and also the ninth sphere Yesod is connected with the tzaddik, the righteous man in Kabbalah, who is the one who leads the people. So that's an interesting connection there too.
All right. And P.L. Pennington has a comment. My takeaway was, know thyself. Once we know and accept ourselves, we are able to be available to help others and love them as we do ourselves. Okay.
Yes.
Very cool. Then looks like that's it for the comments from over here. Let me make sure I'm not.
I see Joe waving.
Brother Joe?
Yes, hello. Absolutely wonderful, Brother Chuck.
Thank you.
Let me apologize in advance. My kids are screaming in the background. My question is, what have you looked into regarding the Shekinah and its use in the other Abrahamic religions, such as Christianity and Islam? I know they actually say the word in the Quran. It's spelled a tiny bit differently, but they actually talk about the divine presence in the Quran. And I don't know, in my reading, I've always kind of equated the Holy Spirit, or every time they talk about divine presence, and I'm always wondering, are they talking about the Shekinah or what? Yeah,
it's interesting. There are Christian traditions, and I'm thinking particularly of the Orthodox traditions in Russia that are very interested in Sophia. And they see Sophia and Shekinah as being one and the same. Also, now I don't know as much about Islam, but one of the things that I have read in study for another paper that I wrote one time was that among the Sufis, particularly in one particular sect, it may be more broad spread than that. I have to admit that I'm not a scholar here, but I do know that in at least one of the Sufi sects, that the ultimate kind of experience of theophany, of experiencing the presence of God, is experiencing Allah in the form of a woman, in the immediate presence of a person. And if you think about that and our kind of common stereotypes about Islam and its regard for women, that's pretty shocking to those stereotypes. So there are definitely connections. Shekinah flows throughout the Abrahamic faiths in different forms. Thanks for bringing that up, Joe.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, back and forth. I don't see any.
Scott still's got his hand up, so.
Oh, go ahead.
Did you have something else? No, okay, all right.
All right.
That was medication.
Jeremy.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, Chuck, thanks a lot. Another great one.
Thank you.
So yeah, I just, I know you're interested in meditation, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of, getting in touch with your inner Shekinah or whatever, or the inner Sophia, and the role meditation might play in that, because I often see meditation as sort of the art of letting go, getting more identified with the source, the origin of myself, and all of these other perturbances, you just kind of let them go, and easily over time, and then you become more and more who you are, and all of those vibrations that disturb you gradually calm down, and you can be yourself, which might be that connection to the Shekinah. I don't know. I just want to get your reactions and some of your reflections on that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and thank you for saying that, because typically when I do presentations these days, it's really focused on contemplative practice in some way or form, and ultimately gets to that. And I included a little bit of contemplative opportunity there when I asked you to close your eyes. But since we've already been talking about the Abrahamic faiths, each one of them has different methods and technologies of emptying the self. So one that's kind of universal across all three is fasting. Fasting is one of those things that we can do, and I know a lot of people think of fasting as just a physical exercise that kind of has some emotional things that happen as a result of it. But fasting is also an opportunity for shifting our consciousness. And as we let go of food, we have an opportunity to also kind of let go of a lot of the other things that we preoccupy ourselves with while we're fasting. And so there are definitely meditations and other practices that can go along with that. Certainly among Sufis, and particularly among dervishes, for example, there's the use of dance. There's also repetition of words and body movements other than dance. This is also true in Judaism, of using repetitious body movements to help tune out a lot of the things that we're constantly occupying our minds and our energy with. And in Christianity, there's a tradition of silent prayer. The idea of just continually saying not this, not that, the via negativa, of not identifying God with anything and trying to ignore our own thoughts and feelings about God while trying to sit in silent, reverent presence. And it is said in that tradition that what one is doing is opening oneself to the presence of the Holy Spirit specifically. And there we have the connection with Shekinah. So all of these traditions, these three major religious traditions in the West, have these technologies and methods of opening to Shekinah, whether it's as the Holy Spirit or the immanent presence of the Creator. But there are many other ways. I mean, every religion, even outside the Western religions, have different ways of opening oneself to realizing union with the immanent presence of the divine within us, and then also within the world around us. I think those are very important practices, and certainly makes sense when we look at this degree, and it's telling us that a knowledge of God, a deeper knowledge of God, is a duty within Freemasonry. That's one of the objectives of Freemasonry. Then this is something that we should be actively seeking, not just talking about. And knowledge comes in many forms, but the most intimate form is when you realize your union with someone or something, that you realize that intimate connection you have. And so thank you, Jeremy. I think that that's an important thing that we as Masons are called to do.
Brother Chuck,
Yes, sir.
question for you. You were talking about ruach, breath.
Yes.
Very powerful. You said God exhaled, we inhaled. You know of any techniques or meditations? Yeah, I'm getting a little esoteric here, but
I appreciate
the breath
that.
is like so powerful. I mean,
Yes, it is.
What could you say about it?
Yeah. Wow. Breath work is, when we start looking at technologies, yes, that's a whole category of inner work that we can do is with breath work. And And I will just say, in my book, Contemplative Masonry, there's some introductions to breath work in that book for anybody that's really interested in beginning to kind of dip their toe into the waters of breath work, if that makes any sense, if I'm not mixing metaphors too much. But yes, the way we use our breath can dramatically affect our consciousness. And being able to do that intentionally is an important skill. So yeah, there are lots of different traditions with lots of different techniques out there. Thank you for bringing that up. Maybe I could say something a little more personal along those lines. I think one of the most powerful breathing techniques that I have practiced is also one of the most simple ones, and that is simply to allow the breath to happen as naturally as possible, to not force it to go in any particular pattern, which is common to most breath work, but rather to just let it go in its own natural rhythm and to sink as deeply into the experience of that breath as possible, and recognize that the movement of that breath is not something that you're doing consciously, that it's the life within you that is actually doing the breathing. And if you can connect with that, if you can realize your union with the life within you through that really peaceful, quiet, undistracted, pure attention to breath as it naturally flows in and out, that can be a really powerful way to accomplish or to get closer to, I'll have to qualify it, to get closer to the kind of experience that we're talking about, the kind of knowledge that we're talking about.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for asking that one.
One of the downsides to hosting these things is that I have to actually host, and I probably only caught about 70% of what you said, darn it. But I will go back and listen to it. One of the gems that I just took away from this is that, and I'll probably use this for Saturday, and that is to connect the breath with movement, connect the breath with, well, my history is martial arts, but it could be dance or it could be anything, and connecting the sympathetic with the parasympathetic, or however you want to define that. So very interesting, very, very interesting. You've given me more homework for tonight than I expected to have. That's for sure. Okay. Do we have anybody else or any other questions?
I need to say hi back to Joe Martinez's wife.
Hey.
Hi there.
This is Barbara. She loves your meditations.
I do.
Oh, hi, Barbara. Thank you.
And she recognized your voice from across the house. So.
I didn't see, and I just looked and I said, wait.
Mom, more of these. Mom, more of these.
Denise made a comment. I really need to keep my eyes closed while listening to these lectures. Really allowed me to concentrate. I totally agree. I'm jealous. I was kind of having to work here, so that kind of fits into what I was saying too. Very cool.
Just so that everybody knows, if you don't know, what Joe is talking about is I have a YouTube channel called Contemplative Builder, and I have a set of audio meditations there at Contemplative Builder. So you can just go into YouTube, type in a search for Contemplative Builder, and you'll find it there. There's other stuff too on that channel, but the meditations in particular.
I was also able to find that by typing in your name, by the way. It comes up as one of like 2 or 3.
Oh, that's good.
So very cool. Last pass. Questions? Comments? Making fun of me? No, that's an avalanche. Never mind.
Oh, I can jump in on that one. Wait, don't go yet. Don't go yet. I've got good one.
But wait, there's more.
All right.
Brother Chuck, you actually, I just thought of something. So we've talked a lot of the blazing star in terms of a spiritual sort of nature, or the in that sense of the word. But
Yes.
is there a physical manifestation? You know, a lot of times we like to link these things to things like astrology, right?
Yeah.
Or astronomy. So
Yeah.
is there a physical embodiment of this star within the night sky?
Yeah, there are different traditions have said different things about where the blazing star is. Most commonly, we actually see the blazing star associated with the sun. That's the most common one, and some of the other ones are escaping me right now. But yes, Sirius comes to mind as a possibility. I think I might have read that somewhere, that someone has connected the blazing star with Sirius. By the way, since we've been talking about meditation and talking about trying to move this symbolism into something more experiential, like that you can see with your actual eyes. So another thing that we can do is like visualize the blazing star is right above our heads. And this is common to many, many spiritual traditions, to visualize a brilliant light just above the head and to feel its presence as our connection with the immanent divine.
Very cool. Very, very
Somebody's,
cool.
yeah. Joshua's writing Venus and Mercury. Yes, that's right. Those also have been, and Jupiter too, by the way, has also been connected with the blazing star.
Yeah, I was going to ask, as so in the Eastern tradition, the North Star, Polaris, comes to mind in terms of a lot of what you were talking about. That particular star is called Dhruv within the Indian astrological system. So
Yes, yeah.
okay,
Polaris makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah,
That does make sense. I have always associated with Sirius because the ancient Egyptians regarded the star Sirius as a symbol of Isis. And so when the star rose over the Nile at a certain point in the year, they knew the flooding of the Nile was coming. They could prepare. They knew crops were coming. So it was very important to them. And then we look at where Isis was transferred or moved throughout history. Athena to the Greeks, was it Sybil, even Columbia, the goddess Columbia. All of these are variations of Isis, and Sophia is another one. And so we look at those, and I think there's a direct correlation between all of these figures and the star Sirius. And I can't help but believe that that's maybe one of the reasons why that's such a prominent symbol in Masonry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are lots of possibilities there. And I think one of the things that you're pointing out that is important is how universal this is. This idea of a brilliant star being a representation of the divine presence in our lives. We can find it in so many ways. And I think that the idea itself is important. And to go back to Jeremy's point and Michael's point, is that getting in touch with that directly rather than filtering it through symbolism is eventually the challenge. The symbolism only serves as a signpost. It's actually the experience of connecting with what we're calling Shekinah that is the important thing. And at some point we have to, if we're going to be taking any of this seriously, we're going to have to try that.
Okay.
That's a great way to shut down conversation, apparently.
No. That the conversational pause means that we've hit that plateau. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. We can still talk.
Okay.